Sherlock Holmes and the Enigma of the Obsidian. Jewel Chapter 1. A most unusual morning. It was an unusually bitter November morning when I awoke to the sound of agitated footsteps pacing the floor below my bedroom at 221B Baker Street. The relentless cadence could only belong to my friend and companion, Sherlock Holmes, whose restless energy often manifested during periods between cases. The clock had barely struck 7, yet the familiar scent of strong tobacco already permeated our lodgings. As I descended the stairs, I found Holmes standing by the window, his tall, lean figure silhouetted against the gray London fog. His pipe dangled precariously from the corner of his mouth, and his dressing gown was carelessly thrown over his shoulders. 3 newspapers lay scattered on the floor, their pages marked with violent circles of red ink. "Ah, Watson, you've finally risen," he exclaimed without turning. "I feared I might have to solve this matter without the benefit of your chronicling." "What matter?" I asked, suppressing a yawn as I moved toward the fireplace, which mercifully Mrs. Hudson had already stoked to combat the morning chill. Holmes spun around, his gray eyes alight with that peculiar gleam I had come to associate with the commencement of a challenging case. The disappearance of Lord Blackwood's Obsidian Jewel, of course. It's been in all the morning papers, though predictably, they've entirely missed the point. I reached for one of the discarded newspapers and scanned the headlines until my eyes fell upon a small article near the bottom of the 3rd page. "Rare gem vanishes from Blackwood estate. No signs of forced entry." "I confess I see nothing extraordinary about a simple theft," I remarked, settling into my armchair. Holmes made a dismissive gesture with his long, nimble fingers. "That, my dear Watson, is precisely why Scotland Yard remains perpetually baffled. This is no simple theft. The obsidian jewel in question is not merely valuable for its monetary worth, which is considerable, but for its historical significance. It was gifted to Lord Blackwood's grandfather by the Emperor of Ethiopia, after a diplomatic mission of utmost secrecy some 60 years ago." "How do you know that?" "It says nothing of the sort in this article." "Because, Watson," Holmes replied, with that familiar hint of impatience, "I make it my business to know what others do not. The jewel has been the subject of several scholarly articles in obscure antiquarian journals. What makes this case particularly fascinating is the impossibility of its circumstances." Before Holmes could elaborate, we were interrupted by a sharp knock at our door. Mrs. Hudson entered, looking somewhat flustered. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes. He's in quite a state." Holmes's eyebrows rose slightly. "Does this gentleman happen to be Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard?" Mrs. Hudson's expression of surprise confirmed Holmes's deduction. "Show him up at once," Holmes commanded, quickly exchanging his dressing gown for a proper jacket. He turned to me with a smile that bordered on smugness. 3, 2, 1. The door burst open, and Inspector Lestrade hurried in, his face flushed from the cold and exertion. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, and dark circles beneath his eyes suggested a sleepless night. "Mr. Holmes," he began without preamble, "I wouldn't be here if the circumstances weren't most peculiar." "The Blackwood jewel," Holmes stated simply, gesturing for Lestrade to take a seat. The inspector's jaw slackened momentarily before he collected himself. "How did you—" "Never mind. Yes, Lord Blackwood's obsidian jewel has vanished under impossible circumstances. The doors were locked, the windows sealed, and 6 guards were positioned throughout the house. Not a single one saw or heard anything. Suspicious." Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin, his expression contemplative. "Tell me, Inspector, was anything else taken? Any other valuables disturbed?" "That's just it, Mr. Holmes. The room contained numerous precious artifacts, gold statues, ancient manuscripts, even a diamond necklace said to have belonged to Marie Antoinette. Yet only the obsidian jewel was taken." "Fascinating," Holmes murmured. "And the jewel's display case? Was it broken?" "No, sir. That's another oddity. The glass case was intact, but the jewel was gone, as if it had simply vanished into thin air. I watched as Holmes's eyes narrowed, a sure sign that his remarkable mind was already assembling the fragments of this puzzle. "Inspector, I will need to examine Lord Blackwood's collection room immediately." "His lordship anticipated your interest," Lestrade replied, producing an envelope from his coat pocket. "He's granted you full access to his estate and insists on your discretion. The family reputation, you understand." Holmes took the envelope and examined its seal before breaking it open with a practiced motion. His eyes scanned the contents rapidly. "Watson, prepare yourself for an excursion to Blackwood Manor. We leave in 30 minutes. As Holmes disappeared into his bedroom to dress, Lestrade turned to me with a weary expression. "Dr. Watson, I've never seen anything like it. A sealed room, vigilant guards, and yet the jewel vanished without a trace. If anyone can make sense of this, it's Mr. Holmes." I nodded reassuringly, though privately, I wondered what we might be walking into. In my years accompanying Sherlock Holmes on his cases, I had learned that the most perplexing mysteries often concealed the most dangerous truths. Holmes reappeared, impeccably dressed in his favorite tweed suit, his expression animated with anticipation. "Before we depart, Inspector, I require one piece of information that the newspapers have omitted. Was there any unusual marking or sign left in place of the jewel?" Lestrade's eyebrows shot up in evident surprise. "How could you possibly know that?" "Yes, a small piece of parchment with a symbol drawn in what appears to be black ink. A circle with 3 lines intersecting its center." A slow, satisfied smile spread across Holmes's face. "Then the game is already afoot, and it promises to be a most singular affair. Come, Watson, not a moment to lose." As we hurried down the stairs and into the waiting hansom cab, I could not help but notice the eagerness in Holmes's movements. After weeks of tedium, his remarkable intellect had found a worthy challenge. And if experience had taught me anything, it was that when Sherlock Holmes was intrigued, I was about to witness the unraveling of a mystery that would test the very limits of logical deduction. The fog had begun to lift as our cab clattered through the streets of London, carrying us toward what would prove to be one of the most baffling and dangerous cases in my long association with Sherlock Holmes, the strange affair of the Obsidian Jewel. Chapter 2. Blackwood Manor. The journey to Blackwood Manor took us beyond London's smoky confines into the lush countryside of Surrey. The estate appeared through wisps of lingering morning mist, an imposing Georgian structure of weathered stone and ivy, surrounded by meticulously maintained gardens that had likely seen centuries of careful tending. "Note the architecture, Watson," Holmes remarked as our cab approached. "The east wing is considerably newer, perhaps 40 years old, while the central structure dates to the early 1700s. Observe how the windows of the original building are smaller, designed for a time when glass was taxed by size." A solemn butler greeted us at the entrance, his expression betraying no emotion beyond professional courtesy. "Inspector Lestrade, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. His lordship awaits you in the library." As we followed the butler through marbled hallways adorned with ancestral portraits, Holmes's gaze darted everywhere, absorbing details I could only imagine were significant to his analytical mind. Lord Richard Blackwood rose from behind an enormous mahogany desk as we entered the library. He was a tall, distinguished man of perhaps 60, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Despite his composed demeanor, the slight tremor in his hands revealed his distress. "Mr. Holmes, I cannot express how grateful I am for your prompt attention to this matter," Lord Blackwood said, extending his hand. "This theft has implications beyond mere financial loss." "So I understand," Holmes replied. "The Obsidian Jewel has historical significance to your family." "Indeed, though I confess I'm surprised by your knowledge of its provenance." Holmes waved away the comment. "Before we examine the scene, pray tell me who had knowledge of the jewel's presence in your collection room." Lord Blackwood settled back into his chair. My immediate family, of course. My wife, Lady Eleanor, my son James, and my daughter Victoria. The household staff were aware of the collection room, but not necessarily of individual pieces. My curator, Dr. Harrington, catalogued the entire collection last month, and I recently hosted a small gathering of the Antiquarian Society, 12 members in total, who were given a tour. And the night of the theft? Who was present in the house? The family, our house guests, Sir Edmund Fairfield and his wife, and the usual staff. 6 guards were positioned strategically throughout the estate, with one directly outside the collection room. Holmes's eyes narrowed. You anticipated a threat to your collection? A shadow crossed Lord Blackwood's face. 3 weeks ago, I received an anonymous letter requesting that I return what was never mine to possess. I dismissed it as nonsense, but doubled the guard nonetheless. May I see this letter? I destroyed it, Lord Blackwood admitted, avoiding Holmes's penetrating gaze. I considered it merely the ramblings of some radical. A mistake, evidently. Indeed, Holmes murmured. Now, I should like to see the collection room. Lord Blackwood led us through a series of corridors to a heavy oak door reinforced with iron. Nothing has been disturbed since the discovery this morning, he assured us, producing a large brass key. The collection room beyond was a museum in miniature. Glass cases containing artifacts from various periods and cultures lined the walls, while freestanding displays occupied the center space. The room had no windows, and a single electric light illuminated the chamber. Holmes moved immediately to an empty case positioned prominently on a pedestal. This housed the jewel? Yes. As you can see, the case is undamaged, yet the jewel is gone. Holmes produced his magnifying glass and began a methodical examination of the case, his nose nearly touching the glass as he circled it. And the parchment with the symbol Inspector Lestrade mentioned? Lord Blackwood removed a folded handkerchief from his pocket and carefully unwrapped it, revealing a small square of yellowed parchment. Upon it was drawn a circle with 3 intersecting lines, precisely as Lestrade had described. Holmes studied it without touching. May I keep this? Lord Blackwood hesitated. The police wish to... I assure you, Inspector Lestrade will have no objection, Holmes interrupted, his tone leaving no room for refusal. After Lord Blackwood reluctantly surrendered the parchment, Holmes turned his attention to the room itself, moving with deliberate care, occasionally dropping to his knees to examine the floor or stretching to inspect the ceiling corners. Watson, he called suddenly, what do you make of this? I joined him by the east wall where he pointed to a nearly imperceptible dark smudge near the baseboard. Could be anything, I offered. Dust, perhaps? Holmes smiled that familiar, slightly condescending smile. Observe more carefully, old friend. The consistency and color. I bent closer. It appears to be... ash? Precisely. And not from any ordinary tobacco or fireplace. He scraped a small sample into a paper envelope. Most curious. While Holmes continued his examination, I studied. Our host, Lord Blackwood, watched Holmes with an expression that seemed to vacillate between hope and apprehension. Your lordship, I ventured, what exactly is the significance of this obsidian jewel? Before he could answer, a young woman appeared in the doorway, strikingly beautiful, with dark hair and Blackwood's aristocratic features. Father, Mother is asking for you, she said, her gaze lingering curiously on Holmes. Victoria, my dear, allow me to introduce Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Gentlemen, my daughter. She curtsied gracefully. The famous detective. How fortunate. Perhaps you might succeed where the police have failed. I intend to, Miss Blackwood, Holmes replied, studying her with unusual intensity. Victoria, please inform your mother I shall join her shortly, Lord Blackwood said, a note of dismissal in his voice. After she departed, Holmes abruptly asked, The guard stationed outside this room. I should like to interview him next. I'm afraid that's impossible. Lord Blackwood replied quietly. "George Winters was found unconscious this morning. He remembers nothing of the night's events and remains bedridden under my physician's care." "Drugged?" I suggested. "Dr. Patterson believes so, though he cannot identify the substance." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "Most illuminating. I should very much like to speak with your physician and examine this guard. But first," he turned to the doorway where Victoria had stood moments before. "I noticed fresh scuffing on the floor outside. Does anyone in your household wear shoes with an unusual composition to the heel?" Lord Blackwood blinked in surprise. "I couldn't say. Is it significant?" "Everything is significant, Lord Blackwood, until proven otherwise." Chapter 3. The Invalid Guard. "I should like to examine the guard immediately," Holmes declared, pocketing the envelope containing the mysterious ash. "His testimony, or lack thereof, may prove crucial." Lord Blackwood hesitated before nodding. "Very well. He's being kept in the servants' quarters. I shall have Bradford show you the way." As the butler led us through the winding corridors of the manor, Holmes maintained an unusual silence, his brow furrowed in concentration. I knew better than to interrupt his thoughts at such moments, though questions burned within me regarding the peculiar clues he had already uncovered. The servants' quarters occupied the west wing of the estate. Simple but comfortable accommodations that spoke of Lord Blackwood's relatively generous treatment of his staff. Bradford directed us to a small room at the end of a narrow hallway, where a middle-aged man with thinning hair and spectacles sat at the bedside of a young, robust-looking fellow. "Dr. Patterson," Bradford announced. "Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson wish to examine the patient." The physician rose, his expression guarded. "I was not informed of this. The man needs rest, not interrogation." "I assure you, Doctor," Holmes replied smoothly, "our methods will not disturb his recovery. Dr. Watson here has considerable medical experience and may offer valuable insights." Dr. Patterson's demeanor softened slightly at this. "Very well, but I must insist on brevity. The poor fellow has suffered enough." Holmes approached the bed where George Winters lay, his complexion pallid despite his otherwise healthy appearance. The guard's eyes were open but unfocused, staring vacantly at the ceiling. "How long has he been in this state?" Holmes inquired, examining the man's pupils with careful attention. "Since he was discovered at approximately 5 o'clock this morning," Dr. Patterson replied. "He was found slumped in a chair outside the collection room, breathing but entirely unresponsive." I stepped forward to conduct my own examination. The guard's pulse was steady but slow, his pupils dilated but responsive to light. His breath carried a faintly sweet odor I couldn't immediately identify. "Has he spoken at all?" Holmes asked, now examining the man's fingernails and the cuffs of his uniform. "Only incoherent mumblings," Dr. Patterson said. "Something about shadows and cold hands. Nothing sensible." Holmes produced a small vial from his pocket, uncorked it, and waved it beneath the guard's nose. The man recoiled violently, his eyes suddenly focusing as he gasped. "Mr. Holmes!" Dr. Patterson protested, but Holmes raised a hand to silence him. "Mr. Winters," Holmes said firmly. "Can you hear me?" The guard's eyes found Holmes, confusion evident in his expression. Where am I?" "You're safe at Blackwood Manor," Holmes assured him. "Do you recall your duties last night?" "I was guarding the collection room," Winters mumbled, his voice hoarse. "Standing post as ordered." "And what do you remember of the night's events?" The guard's brow furrowed with the effort of recollection. "I was making my rounds, checked the door at midnight, then again at 1. I remember feeling suddenly cold, like a draft. But there are no windows in that corridor." "What else?" Holmes pressed gently. "A scent, like burning incense, but different, foreign. Then—" He shook his head in frustration. "Nothing, just darkness." Holmes nodded, seemingly satisfied. One final question, Mr. Winters. Did you observe any visitors to the collection room yesterday? Anyone lingering nearby, perhaps? The guard's eyes widened slightly. Miss Victoria came by in the afternoon to retrieve something. And later, that foreign gentleman who's been visiting, the professor, he asked about the security arrangements, said he was concerned for the family's treasures. Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me. This professor, did Lord Blackwood mention him to you, Watson? I shook my head. No mention was made of any such visitor. Thank you, Mr. Winters, Holmes said, patting the guard's shoulder. You've been most helpful. Rest now. As we left the room, Dr. Patterson followed us into the hallway. What did you administer to him? I demand to know. A harmless stimulant derived from certain Himalayan plants, Holmes replied dismissively. It will cause no lasting effects. Now tell me, doctor, in your professional opinion, what substance was used to render him unconscious? The physician hesitated. It resembles no common sedative I'm familiar with. The symptoms suggest a compound that affects the memory centers of the brain specifically. As I suspected, Holmes murmured. Tell me, how long have you been employed by the Blackwood family? The question seemed to catch Dr. Patterson off guard. Nearly 20 years. I attended Lord Blackwood's late brother in his final illness. And, in that time, have you observed any peculiarities in the family's behavior? Any subjects that seem forbidden? The doctor's face hardened. Mr. Holmes, my relationship with the Blackwood family is bound by professional confidentiality. I will not gossip about my employers. Of course, Holmes replied, though I could see his interest had been piqued by the doctor's defensive response. One final question. Are you acquainted with a visiting professor who has been calling at the manor? Dr. Patterson's expression remained carefully neutral. Professor Morelli, the Italian antiquities expert. He's been consulting with Lord Blackwood about his collection for several weeks. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must attend to my patient. As we made our way back to the main house, Holmes was uncharacteristically animated. Did you notice, Watson? The guard's cuffs had traces of a black, powdery substance, the same ash we found in the collection room. And the doctor's evasiveness, when questioned about family secrets, most revealing. And this Professor Morelli, why was he not mentioned by Lord Blackwood? Precisely the question we must put to him, Holmes replied as we entered the grand foyer. We found ourselves intercepted by a striking woman in her 50s, her silver-streaked dark hair elegantly coiffed, her bearing regal despite the evident strain in her features. Lady Eleanor Blackwood, she introduced herself, extending a gloved hand. My husband informed me of your arrival, Mr. Holmes. I trust you're making progress? We are gathering information, my lady, Holmes replied diplomatically. Though I find myself curious about a certain Professor Morelli who has been advising your husband. I should very much like to speak with him. A flash of something, alarm, annoyance, crossed Lady Eleanor's features before her composure returned. Professor Morelli departed for London early this morning, before the theft was discovered. Most unfortunate timing. Indeed, Holmes murmured. Most unfortunate. If you wish to interview him, I believe he's staying at the Langham Hotel, she added. Now, if you'll excuse me, this distressing affair has given me a terrible headache. As Lady Eleanor ascended the grand staircase, a young man emerged from a side room, his resemblance to Lord Blackwood unmistakable, despite his more youthful features. James Blackwood, he introduced himself with a curt nod. Father says you're to have complete access to the house and grounds, Mr. Holmes. I'm to assist you in any way possible. How fortuitous, Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming with that familiar intensity. Perhaps you might start by showing us any other entrances to the collection room, official or otherwise. Chapter 4. Hidden Passages. Another entrance to the collection room? James Blackwood appeared genuinely perplexed by Holmes's inquiry. I'm not aware of any, Mr. Holmes. The room was specifically designed with a single point of access for security purposes. Nevertheless, Holmes insisted, older houses of this vintage often contain secrets unknown, even to their current occupants. The thickness of the walls, I observed, suggests the possibility of concealed passages. James frowned, his hand absently adjusting his impeccably knotted necktie. Father never mentioned anything of the sort, but this house has been in our family for generations. I suppose it's possible. Your assistance is invaluable, Holmes said. Perhaps you might also illuminate us regarding Professor Morelli. Your mother mentioned he departed rather abruptly this morning. An expression of distaste briefly crossed the young man's features. Morelli? Yes. Father became acquainted with him at some antiquarian function in London. He's been a regular visitor these past weeks, supposedly advising on the authentication of certain artifacts. You don't care for the professor? I ventured. I find his manner obsequious and his interests suspiciously specific, James replied, with aristocratic disdain. He showed little attention to any part of the collection except the artifacts from North Africa and Ethiopia, including the Obsidian Jewel. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Did he examine the jewel closely? On several occasions, he claimed it was a ceremonial object of great significance to ancient Ethiopian religious practices. My sister Victoria was quite captivated by his extensive knowledge. The way James emphasized this last observation carried a hint of fraternal disapproval. As we retraced our steps toward the collection room, Holmes maintained a thoughtful silence. Upon reaching the room, he began a methodical examination of the walls, tapping occasionally and pressing against ornate wooden panels. Watson, your impression of young Mr. Blackwood? Holmes asked quietly as he worked. Seems straightforward enough, I replied, though perhaps somewhat resentful of this professor's influence on his family. Indeed. And note how quick he was to mention his sister's fascination with Morelli. Family dynamics, Watson, often provide the most illuminating backdrop to a crime. Holmes paused at a section of the east wall, his expression sharpening. Ah, listen! He tapped the wall, producing a distinctly hollow sound compared to the solid thud heard elsewhere. James, he called, is there a structural reason why this section might sound different? The young man approached, genuine surprise evident in his expression. Not that I'm aware of. The east wing was rebuilt after a fire in the 1830s, but the collection room was supposedly constructed with reinforced walls throughout. Holmes ran, his fingers along the elaborate molding pressing at various points. Suddenly, with a soft click, a section of paneling recessed slightly. Remarkable, James breathed. Not really, Holmes replied, sliding the panel sideways to reveal a narrow passage beyond. Quite common in houses of this era, particularly those belonging to families with diplomatic connections. Such passages allowed for discreet movement of sensitive visitors or documents. Holmes extracted a small electric torch from his pocket and illuminated the dusty corridor. Observe the floor, Watson. What do you see? I peered into the gloom. Footprints in the dust. Recent ones. Precisely. 2 sets. One coming, one going. Made within the last day, judging by their clarity. But who would know of this passage? James asked, his face pale in the torch's reflected light. Someone intimately familiar with the house's history, Holmes replied. Or someone who made it their business to discover such knowledge. We followed the passage, which curved gently before terminating at another panel. Holmes located the mechanism quickly, and the panel slid open to reveal a small study lined with bookshelves. The library annex, James identified the room. Father's private retreat. Holmes surveyed the room with keen interest, his gaze settling on a desk in the corner. Someone has been at work here recently, he observed, pointing to a faint ring on the polished surface. A glass or tumbler recently removed, and these papers hastily rearranged. He approached a bookshelf, examining the volumes with practiced efficiency. Watson, note this collection. all concerning Ethiopian history and antiquities. Morelli's influence? I suggested. Perhaps. Or perhaps the professor's interest was piqued by Lord Blackwood's existing collection. Holmes removed a volume and leafed through it. Most illuminating. James, when did your family first acquire the Obsidian Jewel? Grandfather brought it back from his diplomatic mission to Ethiopia in the 1860s, James replied. It's been in the family ever since. And its significance was known to your father? James hesitated. Father always seemed protective of it, more so than his other acquisitions. He would sometimes sit alone with it in the collection room, especially after receiving troubling correspondence. Correspondence? Holmes's attention sharpened. From whom? I don't know, but several times a year, letters would arrive bearing Ethiopian stamps. Father would become withdrawn after reading them, sometimes for days. Holmes replaced the book and turned to James with an intensity that seemed to make the young man uncomfortable. Your father destroyed a threatening letter he received 3 weeks ago. Did you happen to see it before its destruction? James's expression revealed his surprise. No, but I did overhear him arguing with Victoria afterward. She was insisting that historical wrongs must be addressed. Father was quite stern with her, unusually so. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. One final question for now. This Professor Morelli, can you describe him physically? Average height, olive complexion, black hair graying at the temples. He walks with a slight stoop, as if perpetually examining the ground. His English is excellent, though occasionally he employs unusual turns of phrase. And his hands? James looked puzzled by the specific query. His hands? I suppose they were refined. The hands of a scholar rather than a laborer. Why do you ask? Details, Mr. Blackwood, often tell more than generalities. Holmes replied enigmatically. Now, I suggest we return to the collection room through the conventional entrance. This passage should remain our little secret for the time being. As we exited the study, I noticed Holmes pocket a small object from the desk, though he did it with such natural fluidity that James seemed not to notice. Outside the collection room, we encountered Lord Blackwood engaged in tense conversation with a strikingly handsome man I had not seen before. Sir Edmund, Lord Blackwood was saying, I assure you that Mr. Holmes is making excellent progress. I should hope so, the stranger replied crisply. The Egyptian Antiquities Fund Gala is in 3 days. If word of this theft spreads, the donation, pledges we've secured might evaporate. Ah, Mr. Holmes, Lord Blackwood turned to us with evident relief. Sir Edmund Fairfield, chairman of the British Museum's Acquisition Committee, and our house guest. Sir Edmund regarded Holmes with cool assessment. Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Holmes. I trust you appreciate the sensitivity of this matter. I appreciate that a valuable artifact has been stolen under impossible circumstances, Holmes replied evenly, and that several people seem more concerned with appearances than with truth. Sir Edmund's expression hardened. The truth, Mr. Holmes, is that Lord Blackwood's collection represents one of the finest private assemblages of African artifacts in England. Its integrity is of cultural significance. Indeed, Holmes murmured. Cultural significance? Tell me, Sir Edmund, have you ever encountered a Professor Morelli in your antiquarian circles? A flicker of something, recognition, concern, passed across Sir Edmund's features before being masterfully suppressed. The name is not familiar to me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must prepare for dinner. And Chapter 5. Dinner. Revelations. Lord Blackwood insisted we remain at the manor for dinner, arranging for our overnight accommodation with an efficiency that suggested he preferred to keep Holmes close at hand. As evening descended upon the estate, we found ourselves in the grand dining room, seated around a magnificent table beneath a glittering crystal chandelier. The company assembled represented all the principal figures in our investigation thus far. Lord and Lady Blackwood at opposite ends of the table, their children Victoria and James, Sir Edmund and his wife, Lady Fairfield, a willowy blonde woman who had said scarcely a word since our introduction, and Dr. Patterson, who had been prevailed upon to join the party after determining that his patient was sufficiently recovered to be left in the care of the housemaid. Holmes, as was his custom, ate sparingly but observed intently, his sharp eyes missing nothing of the subtle tensions that electrified the atmosphere. I noted how Victoria Blackwood's gaze frequently drifted toward the empty chair beside her, a place setting that seemed to have been laid and then abandoned. "I understand Professor Morelli was expected this evening," Holmes remarked casually, as the soup course was cleared away. A momentary silence fell, broken by Lord Blackwood's measured response. "He sent his apologies this morning. Urgent business in London, apparently." "Most convenient timing," James muttered, earning a reproachful glance from his mother. "James," Lady Eleanor admonished, "the professor has been nothing but gracious with his expertise." "I find it curious," Holmes continued, seeming to address his soup bowl rather than the table at large, "that a man of such specific scholarly interests should appear in your circle precisely when threats concerning the Obsidian Jewel began to arrive. Lord Blackwood's spoon clattered against his plate. "Mr. Holmes, I engaged your services to recover the jewel, not to cast aspersions on my acquaintances." "Father," Victoria interjected, her voice soft but determined, "perhaps Mr. Holmes has a point. The timing is peculiar." I observed a flash of surprise cross Lord Blackwood's features at his daughter's intervention. "Professor Morelli came highly recommended by the Ethiopian cultural attaché," Lady Eleanor stated firmly. "His credentials are impeccable." "As verified by whom?" Holmes inquired, accepting a serving of roast pheasant from the footman. "Sir Edmund." Fairfield cleared his throat. "I may have misspoken earlier, Mr. Holmes. Upon reflection, I do recall hearing Morelli's name in academic circles. His monograph on Aksumite religious artifacts was quite well received." Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. "How fascinating that your memory should improve so dramatically over dinner, Sir Edmund." Lady Fairfield spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly strong for someone of such delicate appearance. "My husband meets countless scholars through his work with the British Museum, Mr. Holmes. One can hardly expect him to recall every name immediately." "Of course," Holmes conceded with a politeness that didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, Lord Blackwood, what precisely is the historical significance of the Obsidian Jewel? Beyond its monetary value, that is." Lord Blackwood exchanged a glance with his wife before responding. "It was a ceremonial artifact used in the coronation of Ethiopian emperors. My father acquired it as a gift from Emperor Tewodros II during a diplomatic mission." "A gift?" Victoria's question carried an unmistakable edge. "Is that truly how grandfather described its acquisition in his journals?" A tense silence descended upon the table. Lord Blackwood's complexion darkened noticeably. "Victoria," he warned, "this is hardly the time." "When is the time, father?" she challenged. "When another threatening letter arrives. When more artifacts disappear. The Ethiopian government has formally requested the jewel's return twice in the last decade. Yet, you've ignored them." "The jewel is legally Blackwood property," Lord Blackwood insisted, his knuckles whitening around his fork. "Acquired during a different era, under different circumstances." "Looted, you mean?" Victoria said quietly. "Enough." Lord Blackwood brought his palm down on the table with enough force to rattle the silverware. "Mr. Holmes is here to recover our property, not to judge the legitimacy of our possessions." Holmes observed this exchange with a carefully neutral expression, though I knew him well enough to recognize the keen interest concealed beneath his composure. "Perhaps," he suggested mildly, "the jewel's history might provide insight into who would be motivated to steal it." Dr. Patterson, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke. "The Obsidian Jewel carries a legend, does it not?" Something about a curse upon those who remove it from Ethiopian soil." Lady Eleanor shot the physician a look that might have withered lesser men. "Superstitious nonsense, doctor. I'm surprised you would mention such things." "Legends often contain kernels of historical truth," Holmes observed. "What is the nature of this supposed curse?" James answered before his father could intervene. "It's said that the jewel was carved from the heart of a sacred mountain by priests of the ancient Aksumite kingdom. They imbued it with protective powers to safeguard the royal line. If removed from its rightful place, it would bring misfortune upon the thieves and their descendants until returned." "James, really?" Lady Fairfield tittered nervously. "Such dramatic tales." "The jewel is a significant historical artifact, nothing more," Lord Blackwood declared with finality. "Its value lies in its craftsmanship and historical context. Yet, someone went to extraordinary lengths to obtain it," Holmes noted. "Bypassing guards, leaving other valuables untouched, and using what appears to be a specialized chemical compound to incapacitate Mr. Winters." "You've identified the substance?" Dr. Patterson asked with evident professional interest. "Not precisely, though I have my suspicions." Holmes turned to Victoria. "Miss Blackwood, you visited the collection room yesterday afternoon. May I ask your purpose?" All eyes turned to Victoria, whose composure remained unshaken. "I was retrieving my sketchbook. I've been documenting Father's collection for a monograph I'm preparing on Ethiopian artifacts in British private collections." "With Professor Morelli's guidance, no doubt," James added, unable to disguise his disapproval. "The professor has been most helpful," Victoria acknowledged, meeting her brother's gaze steadily. "Unlike some, he recognizes the importance of proper historical attribution." "And proper repatriation, I imagine," Holmes suggested. Victoria's silence was more revealing than any verbal response might have been. "Mr. Holmes," Sir Edmund interposed smoothly, "while these academic debates are fascinating, they hardly seem relevant to recovering the stolen property." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "motive is always relevant. The jewel might have been taken for its monetary value, certainly, but it might equally have been taken for ideological reasons, or even to fulfill the requirements of the supposed curse." The remainder of the dinner passed in strained conversation about safer topics. As the party rose to retire to the drawing room for coffee, Holmes deftly maneuvered to walk alongside Victoria. "Your sketchbook, Miss Blackwood," I heard him murmur. "Might I examine it?" "Artists often observe details others miss." She regarded him with a mixture of wariness and grudging respect. "It's in my room. I'll fetch it for you in the drawing room." As she ascended the stairs, Holmes turned to me with a significant look. "The game grows more interesting by the hour, Watson. The currents of history run deep in this household, and someone, I believe, is attempting to redirect their flow." Chapter 6. The Sketchbook. The drawing room of Blackwood Manor reflected the family's wealth and taste. Richly upholstered furniture arranged around a magnificent fireplace, walls adorned with paintings of distinguished ancestors and exotic landscapes. The gathered company settled into strained conversations over brandy and coffee, the earlier tensions from dinner still lingering in the air. Holmes positioned himself near the doorway, ostensibly examining a small jade figurine on a side table, but in reality maintaining a perfect vantage point to observe the room's occupants. I joined him, keeping my voice low. "What do you make of Victoria's revelation about the jewel?" "Most illuminating," Holmes murmured. "Lord Blackwood's discomfort suggests there may be truth to her insinuations about its acquisition. The question remains, does this bear directly on our case, or merely provide background?" Our conversation was interrupted by Victoria's return. She carried a leather-bound sketchbook, which she handed to Holmes with a guarded expression. "My amateur efforts, Mr. Holmes. I doubt they'll provide any insight into the theft." Holmes accepted the book with a slight bow. "The trained eye often captures details the conscious mind overlooks, Miss Blackwood. Your perspective may prove invaluable." He opened the sketchbook and began turning pages with careful attention. Victoria had considerable artistic talent. Her renderings of various artifacts were detailed and precise, accompanied by neatly written notes about dimensions, materials, and historical context. "These are quite remarkable," Holmes commented, genuine appreciation in his voice. "You have an exceptional eye for detail." Victoria's expression softened slightly at the compliment. "Thank you. I've been documenting Father's collection for nearly 2 years now." Holmes paused at a page depicting the Obsidian Jewel itself. The drawing showed a polished black stone approximately the size of a hen's egg, set within an intricate gold mounting. Unusual symbols were carved into its surface, which Victoria had meticulously reproduced. "These markings," Holmes inquired, "did Professor Morelli offer any interpretation?" "He said they were sacred text in Ge'ez, an ancient Ethiopian liturgical language. According to him, they identify the jewel as the heart of Axum, a royal talisman meant to protect the emperor and ensure the kingdom's prosperity." Holmes nodded thoughtfully, continuing to turn pages. Suddenly, his expression sharpened. He had reached a page that contained not an artifact sketch, but a portrait. A remarkably detailed rendering of a man with olive skin, graying temples, and intelligent eyes. "Professor Morelli, I presume?" Victoria nodded. "Yes. He was kind enough to sit for me last week." Holmes studied the portrait intently. "You've captured something essential in his expression, a certain watchfulness behind the scholarly demeanor. You're very perceptive, Mr. Holmes. The professor does have that quality. He sees much but reveals little." Holmes turned another page and paused again. This sketch showed the Obsidian Jewel from a different angle, revealing markings on its underside that hadn't been visible in the first drawing. Beside it, Victoria had written several lines in what appeared to be the same ancient script depicted on the jewel. "You've studied the language yourself," Holmes observed. Victoria appeared momentarily surprised by his deduction. "Yes, though I'm hardly fluent. Professor Morelli has been teaching me the basics. These," she pointed to her notations, "are my attempts to transcribe the complete text from the jewel." "And its meaning?" She hesitated, glancing toward her father, who was engaged in conversation with Sir Edmund across the room. "It's a warning, essentially. The heart returns to the mountain, or darkness follows the holder. The curse that Dr. Patterson mentioned. A simplified interpretation, yes. The actual text is more nuanced." Holmes continued examining the sketchbook, his attention now drawn to several pages of landscape drawings. "These are not from the estate grounds," he observed. "No," Victoria confirmed. "They're from my imagination, or rather from descriptions in my grandfather's journals of the region where he acquired the jewel." "Might I examine these journals?" Holmes asked. Victoria's expression closed slightly. "I'm afraid that would be impossible. Father keeps them locked in his safe. He's protective of grandfather's legacy." Holmes returned his attention to the sketchbook, turning to the final pages. I noticed his eyebrows rise fractionally as he studied a rough sketch of what appeared to be a floor plan. "The Manor's east wing," Victoria explained before Holmes could inquire. "I was mapping the architectural modifications made after the fire in the 1830s. There are discrepancies between the exterior dimensions and the interior rooms that fascinated me." "A scholarly interest in architecture as well?" Holmes asked, his tone carefully neutral. "History leaves its traces everywhere, Mr. Holmes, even in walls and passageways." Their eyes met in a moment of silent understanding that confirmed my suspicion. Victoria knew about the secret passage we had discovered earlier. Holmes closed the sketchbook and returned it with a courteous nod. "Thank you, Miss Blackwood. Your artistic talents are considerable, and your observations most helpful." As Victoria rejoined her mother, Holmes drew me aside, his expression animated in a way I recognized from countless investigations. The look of a man who has discovered a crucial piece of evidence. "Watson, we must send a telegram immediately." "At this hour?" Time is of the essence. I need information on a particular topic, and only one man in London can provide it with the necessary speed and discretion. Lord Blackwood approached us, brandy in hand. "Mr. Holmes, have you made any progress in your investigation?" "Several promising avenues have emerged," Holmes replied smoothly. "However, I require the use of your telegraph facilities to consult with a specialist in London." "Of course. Bradford can assist you. The equipment is in my study." "Your other study," Holmes specified with a meaningful glance. "The one accessible through conventional means." Lord Blackwood's expression flickered with momentary surprise before he composed himself. "Ah, you've discovered one of the house's little secrets, I see. The passage to the collection room, an architectural curiosity that significantly alters the parameters of our investigation." Lord Blackwood lowered his voice. "That passage hasn't been used in decades. I'd nearly forgotten its existence myself." "Then, you might be surprised to learn that someone utilized it very recently," Holmes countered. "The dust patterns are quite revealing." Before Lord Blackwood could respond, a commotion erupted at the doorway. Bradford entered, his usual composure shattered. "My lord, forgive the interruption, but there's been another incident." Lord Blackwood straightened, alarm evident in his posture. "What sort of incident?" "Your study, sir. It's been disturbed, and there's a message." Holmes was already moving toward the door. "Show us immediately." We followed Bradford through the corridors to Lord Blackwood's conventional study. A handsome room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive desk. The scene that greeted us was one of calculated disorder. Drawers had been pulled open, papers scattered across the floor, and several books removed from shelves. "Nothing appears to be missing," Lord Blackwood said after a quick assessment. "But someone has certainly been searching for something." "Or creating the impression of a search," Holmes suggested, his keen eyes surveying the scene. "The disruption is theatrical rather than thorough." Bradford directed our attention to the desk, where a folded piece of parchment lay prominently displayed. On its surface was drawn the now familiar symbol, a circle with 3 intersecting lines. Holmes donned a pair of thin gloves before carefully unfolding the parchment. Inside, written in an elegant hand with what appeared to be the same black ink as the symbol, was a message. "The heart returns to the mountain. 1 piece reclaimed, 3 remain. The darkness follows." Holmes looked up, his expression grave. "It would seem, Lord Blackwood, that your Obsidian Jewel was merely the first target. The thief intends to strike again." Chapter 7. The Telegram Lord. Blackwood stared at the message with mounting alarm. 3 remain. What could that possibly mean? "It means," Holmes replied, carefully refolding the parchment, "that our thief has a specific agenda, one that extends beyond the Obsidian Jewel to other items in your collection. Watson, would you be so kind as to make a sketch of this symbol? I'd like to preserve the original exactly as we found it." As I produced my notebook and hastily reproduced the circular design with its 3 intersecting lines, Holmes conducted a methodical examination of the study, paying particular attention to the window latches and the ornate Turkish carpet beneath. "The desk. The window is undisturbed," he announced, "and the carpet shows only the expected footprints of Lord Blackwood and Bradford." He crouched suddenly, extracting something from beside the desk leg with his gloved fingertips. "Ah, another sample of our mysterious ash." The rest of the household had gathered at the study entrance, drawn by the commotion. Lady Eleanor pressed a handkerchief to her lips, while Victoria observed the scene with an intense scrutiny that mirrored Holmes's own. James stood protectively beside his mother, his expression hardening as he surveyed the disarray. "This is becoming intolerable," he declared. "First the jewel, now this invasion of Father's private study. We should summon the local constabulary." "That would be premature," Holmes countered, rising from his examination of the carpet. "The evidence suggests this incident is connected to the original theft, and official involvement might jeopardize our chances of recovering all the targeted items. All the more reason to secure the remaining artifacts immediately, Sir Edmund interjected. Lord Blackwood, do you have any notion which 3 items this message might reference? Lord Blackwood's complexion had grown increasingly pallid. I have several Ethiopian pieces, but none with the historical significance of the Obsidian Jewel. Perhaps, Holmes suggested, the connection is not obvious. The message refers to the mountain. Might this relate to the jewel's origin? Victoria stepped forward hesitantly. According to Professor Morelli, the Obsidian Jewel was carved from a sacred mountain in the Simeon Range, a peak called Ras Dashen, considered by ancient Ethiopians to be the throne of their gods. And did your grandfather acquire other artifacts from this region? Holmes asked Lord Blackwood directly. I'm not certain, Lord Blackwood stammered. His journals might specify, but as Victoria may have mentioned, they are secured in my safe, which I strongly suggest you open, Holmes urged. The journals may provide crucial context for identifying the threatened items. Lord Blackwood appeared to wage an internal battle before nodding stiffly. Very well. He approached a landscape, painting on the far wall, swung it aside to reveal a small wall safe, and manipulated the dial with practiced movements. From within, he extracted a leather-bound journal with faded gilt edges. My father's account of his Ethiopian expedition, he explained, handling the volume with reverence. I've protected it because certain passages might be misinterpreted by modern sensibilities. Or interpreted all too accurately, Victoria murmured, though only those closest to her could hear. Lord Blackwood shot his daughter a warning glance before reluctantly handing the journal to Holmes. I trust your discretion, Mr. Holmes. My interest is in preventing further thefts, not judging historical conduct, Holmes assured him, though I detected a note in his voice that suggested moral judgments might indeed be forming. Holmes quickly leafed through the journal, pausing occasionally, to read passages more thoroughly. Fascinating. Your father was a meticulous chronicler, Lord Blackwood. He describes the acquisition of the Obsidian Jewel in remarkable detail. Yes, well, Lord Blackwood shifted uncomfortably. Diplomatic gifts were customary during such missions. Holmes's eyebrow arched slightly, but he continued his examination of the journal without comment. After several minutes, he looked up with newfound urgency. Lord Blackwood, your father records the acquisition of 4 items from the same temple near Ras Dashen. The Obsidian Jewel, a ceremonial dagger with a curved blade, a gold medallion bearing the seal of an ancient emperor, and a small stone tablet, inscribed with what he describes as protective incantations. Are these items still in your collection? Lord Blackwood's expression confirmed Holmes's suspicion before he even spoke. Yes, all 3 remain in the collection room. Then we must secure them immediately, Holmes declared, snapping the journal shut. Our thief has been explicit about their intentions. But why? Lady Fairfield spoke up, her delicate features pinched with confusion. Why these specific items? Because, Victoria answered before Holmes could. According to Ethiopian legend, they form a set. Ceremonial objects used in the coronation of emperors. The jewel represents the heart of the kingdom, the dagger its strength, the medallion its authority, and the tablet its wisdom. Together, they were believed to ensure divine protection for the royal line. All eyes turned to the young woman, whose cheeks colored slightly under the scrutiny. Professor Morelli's teachings have been thorough indeed, Holmes observed dryly. I've conducted my own research as well, Victoria replied with quiet dignity. These artifacts aren't merely valuable antiquities. They're sacred objects to the Ethiopian people, with profound cultural significance. Lord Blackwood cleared his throat uncomfortably. Be that as it may, they are now part of the Blackwood collection, and I have no intention of losing them to this thief, whatever their motivation. Quite right, Sir Edmund agreed emphatically. Cultural heritage must be preserved, regardless of its current location. Holmes closed the journal with a decisive snap. First, I must send that telegram. Then we shall secure the remaining artifacts and prepare for our thief's return. For return they surely will. Bradford led Holmes to the telegraph office, a small room adjacent to the main study equipped with modern communications equipment. I accompanied them, curious about the recipient of Holmes's urgent message. "Who are you contacting at this hour?" I inquired as Holmes composed his message. "Mycroft," Holmes replied, referring to his elder brother whose enigmatic government position afforded him access to information beyond the reach of ordinary citizens. "I require specific details about recent Ethiopian diplomatic activities in London, particularly regarding cultural repatriation efforts." The message dispatched, Holmes turned to Bradford. "How long has Professor Morelli been visiting Blackwood Manor?" The butler's professional composure faltered momentarily. "The professor first called upon Lord Blackwood approximately 6 weeks ago, sir. He presented a letter of introduction from the Ethiopian cultural attaché. And his visits became regular?" "Yes, sir. Twice weekly, sometimes staying overnight when discussions of the collection extended late into the evening." "His interactions with the family members?" Bradford hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with discussing his employers. "He conversed extensively with Lord Blackwood about antiquities, naturally. Lady Eleanor seemed reserved in his presence. Mr. James avoided him when possible. And Miss Victoria?" "Yes?" Holmes prompted. "Miss Victoria appeared to find his knowledge fascinating. They often conversed in the library, sometimes in languages I did not recognize." "Ge'ez, most likely," Holmes murmured. "And his last visit? When precisely did he depart this morning?" "Very early, sir. Before dawn. I heard the motor car but did not see him leave. Most unusual, as he typically took breakfast before departing." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Bradford. You've been most helpful." As we made our way back toward the collection room, I ventured a question. "You suspect Morelli, then?" "I suspect everyone, Watson," Holmes replied. "But I find the professor's convenient departure particularly noteworthy. However, the execution of the theft suggests intimate knowledge of the house, knowledge that would require either prolonged access or inside assistance." Holmes paused mid-step, his head tilting slightly as if listening to something beyond my perception. "Do you smell that, Watson?" I inhaled deeply. "The same incense-like scent the guard mentioned." "Precisely. And if I'm not mistaken, it's coming from the direction of the collection room." Holmes's pace quickened to a near run. "Quickly, Watson. I fear our thief may be ahead of schedule." Chapter 8. Shadows in the night, Holmes sprinted down the corridor with remarkable agility, my own footsteps thundering behind him as we raced toward the collection room. The peculiar incense-like scent grew stronger with each stride, intermingling with another odor I recognized from Holmes's chemical experiments, a faint metallic tang that suggested burning minerals. "Bradford!" Holmes called out to the butler who had followed us at a more dignified pace. "Alert Lord Blackwood immediately, but tell no one else." As we rounded the final corner, the corridor leading to the collection room appeared deserted, though guard who should have been stationed outside conspicuously absent. The ornate door stood slightly ajar, a thin wisp of grayish smoke seeping through the gap. Holmes pressed himself against the wall beside the door, withdrawing a small revolver from his pocket. He caught my surprised expression and shrugged almost apologetically. "The stakes warranted precaution," he whispered. "Stand ready, Watson." With a swift movement, Holmes pushed the door fully open, and we burst into the collection room. The acrid scent was overwhelming here, emanating from a small brass bowl placed on the floor beneath one of the display cases. Within it, some substance smoldered, releasing tendrils of smoke that curled upward in hypnotic patterns. But more alarming was the figure hunched by the far display case. A slender silhouette cloaked in dark fabric, their back to us as gloved hands worked at the cases, Lock with practiced precision. Step away from the case, Holmes commanded, his revolver leveled steadily. Turn around slowly. The figure froze but made no move to obey. Instead, in a fluid motion that spoke of considerable physical training, they hurled something toward the floor at their feet. A bright flash erupted, accompanied by a thunderous crack that momentarily blinded and disoriented us. By the time my vision cleared, the figure was already at the secret panel in the east wall, sliding it open with obvious familiarity. Holmes fired a single shot, not at the intruder but at the panel mechanism. Wood splintered, but the panel had already opened enough for the lithe figure to slip through. After them, Watson, Holmes cried, already moving toward the passage. We entered the narrow corridor, Holmes's electric torch illuminating our way. Ahead we could hear rapid footsteps and the rustle of fabric against stone walls. The passage felt interminable as we pursued our quarry, the air growing increasingly stale and the walls seeming to close in around us. When we finally emerged into Lord Blackwood's private study, the window stood open, curtains billowing in the night breeze. Holmes rushed to it, peering out into the darkness of the grounds beyond. "There!" he exclaimed, pointing to a shadowy figure racing across the moonlit lawn toward the perimeter of the estate. "They're heading for the eastern boundary wall." Without hesitation, Holmes swung himself over the windowsill and dropped to the ground below, his long legs already in pursuit. I followed, my old military training serving me well as I landed and regained my footing quickly. The chase led us through meticulously maintained gardens, past ornamental fountains, and into a dense copse of trees that marked the estate's boundary. All the while, our quarry maintained their lead with preternatural speed and agility, navigating the terrain as if intimately familiar with every root and stone. As we approached the boundary wall, an imposing structure of weathered stone some 8 feet in height, the figure paused, seemingly trapped. Then, to my astonishment, they leapt upward with incredible grace, caught the top of the wall, and pulled themselves up in one fluid motion. Holmes redoubled his pace, reaching the wall, just as the figure prepared to drop to the other side. With remarkable determination, my friend launched himself upward, his fingers managing to grasp the hem of the intruder's cloak. For a breathless moment they struggled, the thief trying to break free, Holmes refusing to relinquish his grip. The struggle ended abruptly when the clasp of the cloak gave way. The thief tumbled to the other side of the wall while Holmes fell backward, the empty garment clutched in his hands. By the time I reached him, Holmes was already examining the abandoned cloak by the beam of his torch. It was of unusual make, finely woven black fabric with subtle patterns embroidered along its edges. Ethiopian craftsmanship, Holmes observed, fingering the material thoughtfully. Recent manufacture, but deliberately antiquated in style. A sudden commotion from the direction of the house drew our attention. Lanterns and voices indicated a search party had been organized. Leading them was James Blackwood, his expression thunderous in the wavering light. "Did you see them? Did you catch the thief?" he demanded as he reached us. "We gave chase, but they escaped over the wall," Holmes replied, carefully folding the cloak over his arm. "However, the encounter was not without value. What of the collection? Room? Was anything taken?" "The ceremonial dagger is gone," James confirmed grimly. "Father is beside himself. The medallion and tablet remain, thankfully. 1 piece reclaimed, 3 remain," Holmes quoted from the mysterious message. "Our thief is methodically working through their list." We returned to the house, where the entire household had gathered in the grand foyer, various states of alarm and dishabille suggesting they had been roused from their beds by the commotion. Lord Blackwood paced agitatedly while Lady Eleanor attempted to calm him, her own composure notably strained. "This is outrageous," Lord Blackwood fumed upon seeing us. "Twice now this thief has violated my home and stolen my property." "Not just any property," Holmes noted, displaying the captured cloak. "Items specifically connected to Ras Dashen and the ancient Ethiopian royal line. "Does this garment look familiar to anyone?" Victoria stepped forward, her eyes widening as she examined the cloak. "It resembles traditional Ethiopian ceremonial wear, but I've never seen this particular piece before." "Are you certain?" Holmes asked, watching her closely. "Quite certain," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Though Professor Morelli once mentioned that such cloaks were worn by temple guardians in ancient times." "Professor Morelli again," James muttered. "How convenient that he departed just before these incidents began." "Actually," Holmes countered, "his departure coincided precisely with the first theft, not before it." "Semantics," James dismissed with a wave of his hand. "The fact remains that these thefts began after his arrival in our home." "The timing is certainly suggestive," Holmes agreed, "though not conclusive. I find it equally interesting that our thief navigated both the secret passage and the grounds with remarkable familiarity." His gaze swept the assembled company, lingering momentarily on each face before he continued. "I propose that we secure the remaining artifacts, not in the collection room, but in a location of my choosing. Furthermore, I suggest we all retire for what remains of the night. Tomorrow will require clear heads and careful consideration." Lord Blackwood reluctantly agreed to Holmes's suggestion. The medallion and tablet were carefully wrapped and placed in a small safe concealed behind a false panel in the drawing room floor, a hiding place Holmes discovered through his methodical examination of the house. As we finally retired to our assigned guest chambers, I could not help but ask the question that had been troubling me throughout the night's events. "Holmes, do you believe Morelli is our thief?" Holmes lit his pipe, the familiar ritual seeming to soothe him after the evening's exertions. "He is certainly involved, Watson, though whether as thief, instigator, or something else entirely remains to be determined. Consider, our thief displayed intimate knowledge of the house, considerable athletic ability, and a specific agenda tied to Ethiopian cultural heritage. Victoria seemed genuinely unfamiliar with the cloak," I observed. "Indeed, though her knowledge of Ethiopian artifacts and apparent sympathy for repatriation efforts make her connection to these events worthy of consideration." "Surely you don't suspect her of being the thief?" I asked, somewhat taken aback. Holmes exhaled a cloud of tobacco smoke, his expression contemplative. "I suspect everyone and no one, Watson. The evidence must guide us, not assumptions or personal sympathies." He moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit grounds where our chase had so recently played out. "What I find most intriguing is not who took these artifacts, but why now. The Obsidian Jewel and its companions have resided in the Blackwood collection for decades. What precipitated this suddenly urgent effort to reclaim them? The curator's recent cataloging, perhaps, making their existence more widely known?" "Perhaps," Holmes conceded. "Or perhaps something else. Something connected to that symbol of 3 lines intersecting a circle. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall see if Mycroft's information sheds light on this affair. For now, I suggest we follow my advice to the household and seek what rest we can." As I settled into bed, I reflected on the night's bizarre events, the swiftness and precision of the thief, the strange incense that had somehow incapacitated the guard, the methodical targeting of specific artifacts, all suggested a plan long in the making, executed with meticulous care. Yet something nagged at me, a detail mentioned earlier that seemed somehow significant. As sleep finally claimed me, I could not help but feel that Holmes had already grasped this elusive connection, and that tomorrow would bring us much closer to the truth behind the enigma of the Obsidian Jewel. Chapter 9. Mycroft's Intelligence. Morning arrived with a persistent drizzle that shrouded Blackwood Manor in a melancholy gray mist. I found Holmes already dressed and pacing our shared sitting room when I emerged from my bedchamber, his expression indicating he had been awake for hours, perhaps not having slept at all. "Ah, Watson, excellent timing. Bradford has just informed me that a telegram arrived from Mycroft." He brandished a folded paper with evident satisfaction. "What news from your brother?" I inquired, accepting the cup of tea Holmes poured for me. "Most illuminating," he replied, his eyes gleaming with that familiar intensity that signaled progress in a case. "It seems that 3 months ago, the Ethiopian government formally appointed a new cultural attaché to their London legation, a Dr. Ermias Tafari, renowned archaeologist and expert on Aksumite religious artifacts. And his mission in London? Officially, to foster cultural exchange and understanding. Unofficially, according to Mycroft's sources, to negotiate the return of specific Ethiopian artifacts from British museums and private collections, particularly those removed during the British expedition to Magdala in 1868. I frowned, searching my memory. Was that not when Lord Blackwood's father acquired the Obsidian Jewel? Precisely. According to the journal, he accompanied the expedition as a diplomatic observer. His acquisition of the 4 artifacts occurred during the chaos following the Emperor's defeat. Holmes passed me the telegram, allowing me to read the remainder of Mycroft's message. Dr. Tafari has been particularly focused on artifacts connected to the royal line, I read aloud. He claims certain items were not merely cultural treasures, but sacred objects whose removal has had spiritual consequences for Ethiopia? Keep reading, Holmes urged. The final paragraph is most pertinent. Recent intelligence suggests Dr. Tafari may be operating beyond diplomatic channels. His family claims descent from the priests who guarded the temple at Ras Dashen. Their ancestral symbol, a circle with 3 intersecting lines, representing the mountain's 3 peaks. I looked up sharply. Then Dr. Tafari is connected to our symbol. It appears so, Holmes confirmed. Though whether as thief, mastermind, or merely someone whose family history is being exploited by others remains to be determined. And Professor Morelli? I asked. Does Mycroft mention him? Curiously, no. When I specifically inquired about an Italian antiquities expert by that name, Mycroft could find no record of such a person in academic or diplomatic circles. The implications of this were interrupted by a knock at our door. Bradford entered, his usual composure somewhat restored after the night's disturbances. "Lord Blackwood requests your presence in the breakfast room, gentlemen. The family is assembled." We found a somber gathering around the breakfast table. Lord Blackwood appeared to have aged overnight, the lines in his face deepened by stress and lack of sleep. Beside him, Lady Eleanor maintained a brittle composure as she methodically buttered toast she would not eat. James glowered into his coffee cup, while Victoria sat slightly apart, her expression unreadable as she sketched something in a small notebook. Sir Edmund and Lady Fairfield completed the party, both looking uncomfortable in the tense atmosphere. Dr. Patterson was notably absent. "Mr. Holmes," Lord Blackwood greeted us wearily, "please tell me you have made progress." "Considerable progress," Holmes replied, taking a seat. "Though I must ask some potentially sensitive questions." "Ask what you must," Lord Blackwood conceded. "I want this thief caught and my property returned." Holmes produced the mysterious symbol, the circle with 3 intersecting lines, and placed it on the table. "Are any of you familiar with this symbol, beyond its appearance in connection with the thefts?" The assembled company examined it with varying degrees of interest, but all shook their heads. "Victoria?" Holmes prompted, noticing she had barely glanced at it. She looked up from her, sketching with a start. "I'm sorry?" "This symbol, have you encountered it in your studies of Ethiopian culture?" She examined it more carefully. "It resembles some ancient Aksumite royal insignia, though I couldn't tell you its specific meaning without consulting my references." "Professor Morelli never mentioned it?" "Not that I recall." Her response was swift. Perhaps too swift, I thought. Holmes turned his attention to Lord Blackwood. "My sources in London inform me that Ethiopia recently appointed a new cultural attaché, Dr. Ermias Tafari, whose family has historical connections to the temple from which your father acquired these artifacts. Have you had any contact with this individual?" Lord Blackwood's teacup clattered against its saucer. Tafari? Yes, he wrote to me several months ago, requesting a meeting to discuss items of mutual cultural interest. I declined, of course. These persistent attempts at recovering what are now legally Blackwood possessions have become tiresome. And did Professor Morelli arrive shortly after this declined meeting request? Lord Blackwood frowned, considering. Now that you mention it, yes. Perhaps a month later. Why? Do you believe they're connected? It seems a reasonable hypothesis, Holmes replied carefully. Tell me, who arranged the professor's introduction? You mentioned a letter from the Ethiopian cultural attaché. Was it signed by Dr. Tafari? Lord Blackwood hesitated, looking suddenly uncertain. I assumed it was, though I don't recall the signature specifically. The letter arrived through proper diplomatic channels. Holmes turned to Victoria. Miss Blackwood, in your conversations with Professor Morelli, did he ever mention Dr. Tafari or the Ethiopian legation? Victoria set down her pencil. He spoke of ongoing efforts to catalog and possibly repatriate culturally significant artifacts, but never mentioned specific individuals involved in these efforts. I find that curious, Holmes remarked, given his apparent expertise in Ethiopian antiquities and their cultural significance. What exactly are you implying, Mr. Holmes? James demanded, his patience visibly fraying. Merely that the circumstances surrounding Professor Morelli's appearance at Blackwood Manor warrant closer examination. Would anyone object to my sending a telegram to the Langham Hotel, where Lady Eleanor indicated the professor is staying? No one objected, though I noticed a flicker of something apprehension cross Victoria's features. While we await that response, Holmes continued, I would like to examine the remaining artifacts, the medallion and the tablet. Their specific characteristics may provide further insight into our thief's motivations. Lord Blackwood led us to the drawing room, where Holmes had concealed the artifacts the previous night. The small safe remained undisturbed, much to everyone's evident relief. Lord Blackwood carefully unwrapped the gold medallion first, an exquisite piece approximately 3 inches in diameter, bearing the relief image of a crowned figure surrounded by ancient script. The seal of Emperor Ezana, Victoria identified it quietly. The first Ethiopian emperor to embrace Christianity in the 4th century. Holmes examined it carefully through his magnifying glass. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. And the tablet? The stone tablet was smaller than I had expected, perhaps 5 inches square, covered in densely packed symbols similar to those on the Obsidian Jewel. The protective incantations, Lord Blackwood explained. Supposedly they ward off evil spirits and ensure divine favor. Holmes studied the tablet intently, his finger tracing the lines of text without touching the surface. Miss Blackwood, with your knowledge of Ge'ez, can you translate any portion of this text? Victoria hesitated before approaching. I can recognize some phrases. This section speaks of binding the darkness and sealing the mountain's heart. This part mentions 4 guardians and eternal vigilance. Most interesting, Holmes murmured. The reference to 4 guardians may well correspond to our 4 artifacts. A commotion in the hallway interrupted further examination. Bradford appeared at the drawing room door, his expression troubled. A telegram for Mr. Holmes, he announced, presenting a silver tray with the message. Holmes read it quickly, his eyebrows rising. It seems the Langham Hotel has no record of a Professor Morelli, either as a current or recent guest. That's impossible, Lady Eleanor protested. He specifically mentioned staying there when in London. Another deception, Holmes said grimly, in what I fear is an increasingly complex web of them. Lord Blackwood, I believe it's time we contact Scotland Yard directly. This case has dimensions beyond a simple theft. As Lord Blackwood moved to give instructions to Bradford, Holmes drew me aside, speaking in a hushed tone. Watson, did you notice Victoria's sketching during breakfast? I observed she was drawing something, yes. Not just something, someone. I glimpsed it briefly. A face rendered in quick, confident strokes. A face remarkably similar to the guard who was drugged, but with subtle alterations. "You believe she was disguising him in her drawing?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with that peculiar light that signaled his mind was assembling disparate pieces into a coherent picture. "I believe, Watson, that we are dealing with a masquerade of remarkable sophistication, one in which identities are as fluid as the shadows that have thus far concealed our thief." Chapter 10. The trap is set. "A masquerade?" I echoed, keeping my voice low. "You believe someone is impersonating others in the household?" "Not precisely," Holmes replied, "but I do believe identities have been assumed and discarded as needed. Consider the timing. Dr. Tafari contacts Lord Blackwood and is rebuffed. Shortly thereafter, Professor Morelli appears with impeccable credentials that apparently cannot be verified. The thefts begin. Morelli vanishes. And through it all, the symbol of the 3 peaks of Ras Dashen connects these events. Our conversation was interrupted by Lord Blackwood's return. "I've sent for Inspector Lestrade, as you suggested, Mr. Holmes, but I fear it will be hours before he can arrive from London." "Then we must use that time wisely," Holmes declared. "I propose we set a trap for our thief. They have taken 2 artifacts and will undoubtedly return for the remaining 2. "How can you be certain?" Sir Edmund asked skeptically. "Surely after 2 encounters, they must realize the risk of returning is considerably greater." "Because," Holmes explained, "the 4 artifacts form a set with apparent ritual significance. The tablet Victoria partially translated refers to 4 guardians and binding the darkness. Our thief's message stated explicitly, 1 piece reclaimed, 3 remain. They will not stop until all 4 pieces are recovered." "What do you propose, Mr. Holmes?" Lord Blackwood asked, his demeanor showing a new respect for Holmes's insights. "We create the appearance that you've moved the remaining artifacts to your bank vault in London for safekeeping. We allow this information to circulate among the household. Meanwhile, the actual artifacts remain here, secretly, as bait for our thief." "And how will this reveal their identity?" James inquired, his tone suggesting he remained unconvinced of Holmes's methods. "Because," Holmes replied with quiet confidence, "I believe our thief's next move is already determined. The pattern of the first 2 thefts reveals a methodical's mind, someone who employs misdirection and exploits inside knowledge of the house, someone who plans with precision, but can adapt when circumstances change." "You speak as if you admire this criminal," Sir Edmund observed coldly. "I appreciate ingenuity, even when employed for illicit purposes," Holmes acknowledged. "But what I most appreciate is the predictability of pattern. Our thief has established one, and in doing so, has constrained their future actions." With Lord Blackwood's reluctant approval, Holmes set his plan in motion. Bradford was instructed to arrange for a heavily guarded carriage to travel to London, supposedly carrying the precious artifacts to the Blackwood family's bank. Holmes insisted that this information be shared with all household staff, creating the impression that the remaining treasures were beyond the thief's reach. Meanwhile, the medallion and tablet were secreted in an entirely new location, a hollow space behind the wainscoting in the morning room, a chamber seldom used by the family. Holmes personally supervised this concealment, allowing only Lord Blackwood, Watson, and himself to know the true location. As noon approached, a telegram arrived from Inspector Lestrade, indicating he would reach Blackwood Manor by evening. Holmes seemed pleased by this timing, remarking that it aligned perfectly with his expectations for the thief's final attempt. "You believe they'll strike tonight?" I asked as we took a turn about the grounds, ostensibly for fresh air, but in reality, to inspect the perimeter of the estate for possible entry points. "I would wager considerably on it," Holmes replied. "Our thief knows that official investigation will intensify. The window of opportunity is closing. They must act tonight or risk losing their chance entirely." "And you're certain the bait will draw them out?" What if they believe the artifacts truly have been removed to London? Holmes smiled enigmatically. I've taken measures to ensure our thief receives conflicting information. But more importantly, I believe they possess a means of verifying the artifact's presence, something connected to the ash we found at both crime scenes and the incense-like substance used to incapacitate the guard. As we completed our circuit of the grounds, Holmes directed my attention to several key locations. The eastern wall where our chase had ended the previous night, a small gardener's shed near the boundary, and particularly an ancient oak tree, whose massive branches extended close to the upper windows of the east wing. Potential entry points, he explained. I've asked James to position the remaining guards accordingly, though not precisely where our thief would expect them. Upon returning to the house, we found an atmosphere of tense anticipation had settled over the inhabitants. Lord Blackwood had sequestered himself in his study with Sir Edmund, while Lady Eleanor and Lady Fairfield sat in strained silence in the drawing room, their needlework providing little distraction from their evident anxiety. Victoria was nowhere to be seen, a fact Holmes noted immediately. Miss Blackwood has retired to her room with a headache, Bradford informed us when Holmes inquired. She requested not to be disturbed until dinner. And Dr. Patterson? Holmes asked. Still attending to George Winters, sir. The guard's recovery appears to be progressing, though he remains confused about the events of the night he was drugged. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. I should like to speak with him again before Inspector Lestrade arrives. His testimony, even fragmented, may prove valuable. We found Dr. Patterson in the servants' quarters, packing his medical bag as Winters sat upright in bed. His color much improved, though his expression remained troubled. Mr. Holmes, the doctor acknowledged with professional courtesy. George is much better today, though I've advised against returning to duties for another 24 hours. Understandable, Holmes agreed. Mr. Winters, I wonder if your memory has yielded any additional details since our last conversation. The guard frowned, his struggle to recollect evident in his furrowed brow. Not much, sir. Still mostly darkness, after I smelled that strange incense. Though, he hesitated, his expression uncertain. Yes? Holmes prompted gently. Even seemingly insignificant details may prove important. Well, sir, I had the oddest dream while I was under. A woman's voice, speaking words I couldn't understand. Foreign-like. And cold fingers touching my forehead, almost like a blessing. He shook his head. Probably just nonsense from whatever drug they used on me. Perhaps, Holmes replied, though his expression suggested otherwise. Did anything about the voice seem familiar? Winters considered the question carefully. No, sir, though it was gentle-like. Educated, I'd say. Not rough or common. Holmes thanked him and we departed, my friend unusually silent as we made our way back to the main house. I knew better than to interrupt his thoughts when his brow furrowed in that particular manner, the sign of active deduction. It was approaching dusk when Inspector Lestrade finally arrived, looking travel-worn but alert. Lord Blackwood received him in the library, where Holmes had assembled a concise summary of the case thus far, including detailed descriptions of the stolen artifacts. 2 thefts, both seemingly impossible, both targeting specific Ethiopian artifacts, Lestrade summarized, skimming Holmes's notes. And you believe a 3rd attempt is imminent? Tonight, Holmes confirmed. The pattern suggests escalating urgency. Our thief began with the Obsidian Jewel, the heart of the set. Then the ceremonial dagger, the strength. Logic suggests the medallion of royal authority will be next, followed by the tablet of wisdom. And you've set a trap, Lestrade noted, a hint of professional skepticism in his voice. With yourself as bait, I presume? Watson and I will be monitoring the morning room where the artifacts are concealed, Holmes confirmed. You and your men can maintain a wider perimeter, but I must insist that no one approaches the room itself unless I signal. Our thief has proven adept at evasion. Startling them prematurely would likely result in another failed capture. Lestrade reluctantly agreed to Holmes's conditions, positioning his men discreetly throughout the manor. As night fell, the household retired early, the strain of recent events evident in their subdued manner. Holmes and I took our positions in a small alcove adjacent to the morning room, partially concealed by heavy velvet curtains yet affording a clear view of the wainscoting where the artifacts were hidden. Holmes had extinguished all lamps, leaving the room illuminated only by moonlight filtering through the windows. "Now, Watson," he whispered, checking his pocket watch in a stray beam of moonlight, "we wait for our thief to make their final move, and spring a trap of my design that will reveal not only their identity, but the full scope of this most remarkable deception." Chapter 11. The Final Attempt. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. Midnight came and went with no disturbance beyond the occasional creaking of the old house settling, and the distant hooting of an owl hunting in the estate grounds. Holmes remained utterly motionless beside me, his keen eyes fixed on the wainscoting concealing the precious artifacts, his body tense with anticipation, like a coiled spring. "Patience, Watson," he whispered when I shifted slightly to ease the discomfort of our cramped hiding place. "Our quarry is methodical. The previous thefts occurred between 2 and 3 in the morning, the deepest part of the night, when human alertness is at its lowest ebb." True to Holmes's prediction, as the grandfather clock in the hallway solemnly chimed 2, a change occurred in the atmosphere of the room. It began almost imperceptibly, a faint, now familiar scent of exotic incense drifting through the air, seemingly from nowhere. Holmes touched my arm in warning, his lips close to my ear. "Do not react, Watson. The incense is meant to ensure anyone in the room would be rendered unconscious. Our handkerchiefs, treated with the counteragent I prepared, will protect us." We pressed the prepared handkerchiefs to our faces as the scent intensified. Had Holmes not anticipated this development, I have no doubt we would have succumbed to the same narcotic effect that had incapacitated the guard during the first theft. The door to the morning room remained closed, yet the scent continued to strengthen, suggesting another point of entry. Holmes's gaze shifted upward, and following it, I observed a small ventilation grate near the ceiling emitting the faintest wisps of smoke. Minutes passed, the tension mounting unbearably until the silence was broken by the barely perceptible sound of a panel sliding open. Not the door, nor any window, but a section of the ornate wainscoting opposite our hiding place. A secret passage neither of us had detected in our examination of the room. A figure emerged, moving with fluid grace despite being encumbered by a dark hooded cloak similar to the one Holmes had captured during our chase. The thief carried a small brass bowl from which the hypnotic smoke emanated. Setting this carefully on the floor, they began to examine the wainscoting where Holmes had concealed the artifacts, slim fingers pressing methodically against the woodeny panels. Despite the concealing cloak, the figure's movements suggested a familiarity with the room's architecture that could only come from intimate knowledge of the house. Holmes remained perfectly still. His eyes narrowed in concentration as he observed every gesture and movement of our mysterious intruder. The thief located the hidden compartment with remarkable speed, pressing a specific point in the decorative molding that caused a panel to spring open, revealing the medallion and tablet within. With reverent care, the cloaked figure lifted the medallion, examining it in the dim moonlight, turning it to verify some detail before carefully placing it within a pouch concealed beneath the voluminous cloak. As they reached for the tablet, Holmes finally moved. In one fluid motion, he stepped from our hiding place, revolver in hand. "That will be quite enough," he declared, his voice steady and commanding. "I suggest you remain perfectly still." The thief froze momentarily, then whirled to face us, the hood of the cloak falling back to reveal Victoria Blackwood, Holmes stated, unsurprised. "Or should I address you as Dr. Ermias Tafari's accomplice?" Victoria's expression betrayed momentary shock before settling into resignation. She straightened, abandoning any pretense of denial. "How long have you known Mr. Holmes?" she asked, her voice remarkably composed for someone caught in the act of theft. "I suspected from our first meeting," Holmes replied. "Your knowledge of Ethiopian artifacts was too extensive to be merely academic. Your sketchbook contained details only someone intimately familiar with the jewel's significance would recognize. But certainty came when the guard mentioned a woman's voice, speaking in a foreign tongue, during his supposed unconsciousness." Victoria's chin lifted defiantly. "Then you understand why this must be done. These artifacts were stolen from my mother's people. Sacred guardians meant to protect, not ornaments to be displayed in a colonial trophy case." "Your mother's people?" I echoed, confused. "Miss Blackwood is half Ethiopian," Holmes explained, his revolver unwavering. "Her mother was not the Italian opera singer the family claimed, but an Ethiopian woman Lord Blackwood met during a diplomatic visit to Addis Ababa 27 years ago. A woman connected to the priestly line of Rasi, Dashan temple guardians." Victoria's eyes widened. "How could you possibly know that? Your sketchbooks contained landscapes you claimed were imagined from your grandfather's descriptions, yet they showed details only someone who had seen Ethiopia with their own eyes could know. Your facility with Gayez exceeds what Professor Morelli could have taught in a few short weeks. And most tellingly, your father's extreme protectiveness of both you and the artifacts suggested a connection deeper than mere possessiveness. Watson," Holmes continued, "Miss Blackwood has been systematically reclaiming her maternal heritage. Artifacts her father refused to acknowledge were rightfully hers by blood." "And Professor Morelli?" I asked, beginning to see the pattern Holmes had discerned. "A fiction," Holmes replied, "created by Dr. Tafari to gain access to Blackwood Manor after his official overtures were rebuffed. I suspect he is both Victoria's ally in this endeavor, and perhaps a relative on her mother's side." Victoria neither confirmed nor denied this. Her silence admission enough. "The drugged guard recognized your voice," Holmes pressed. "You administered the narcotic incense and spoke Gayez rituals over him, not to harm but to ensure he would be found merely unconscious, not injured." "I would never hurt anyone," Victoria insisted. "This is about justice, not revenge." "A noble sentiment," Holmes acknowledged, "though your methods remain criminal. The law recognizes Lord Blackwood's ownership, regardless of the artifact's origins. Colonial laws written by colonial powers," Victoria replied with quiet intensity. "These artifacts are not merely valuable antiquities, Mr. Holmes. They are living connections to spiritual traditions. The tablet you so casually call the fourth piece contains sacred texts meant to prevent catastrophe." "The curse," I murmured. "Not a curse as Europeans understand it," Victoria corrected. "A warning. These 4 artifacts were created to bind an ancient evil, a darkness in the mountain, that the priests sealed away centuries ago. When separated and removed from Ethiopian soil, the binding weakens." "You expect us to believe in mystical forces?" I asked incredulously. "I expect you to respect beliefs not your own," she replied with dignity. "Whether you accept the spiritual truth is immaterial. The historical and cultural significance alone should merit their return." A sound from the hallway interrupted our conversation, footsteps approaching rapidly. The door burst open to reveal Lord Blackwood, accompanied by Inspector Lestrade and James. "Victoria?" Lord Blackwood's voice broke as he took in the scene, his daughter clutching the sacred tablet, facing Holmes's revolver. "What is the meaning of this?" "I believe your daughter can explain better than I," Holmes replied, lowering his weapon, now that others had arrived. "Though it would require honesty you have long avoided, Lord Blackwood." The color drained from Lord Blackwood's face as understanding dawned. "You know," he whispered, "about your first marriage in Ethiopia? About Victoria's true heritage, which you've concealed from English society?" "Yes," Holmes confirmed. "Just as I know that the threatening letters you received came not from strangers, but from your daughter's maternal relatives. the very guardians, of the temple from which your father took these artifacts. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I discovered the truth 3 years ago, Father, when I found Mother's letters hidden in your library. Letters begging you not to take her from her homeland, not to separate her from her sacred duties. Letters you never answered. James stared at his sister in shock. What is she talking about, Father? Lord Blackwood seemed to age a decade before our eyes, his shoulders slumping under the weight of exposed secrets. Your sister is not Eleanor's daughter, he admitted quietly. Her mother was Makeda, high priestess of the Ras Dashan temple. We were wed in an Ethiopian ceremony before I returned to England. When I learned she was with child, I arranged for Victoria to be brought to England after her birth, claiming she was the orphaned daughter of an Italian acquaintance whom Eleanor and I had adopted. And her mother? I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. Died of grief, according to her brother's letters, Lord Blackwood replied, unable to meet his daughter's gaze. I told myself I was giving Victoria a better life, education, opportunity, position in society. I never expected her to discover her heritage, or to embrace it so completely that she would conspire to return her mother's sacred treasures to their rightful place, Holmes concluded. Inspector Lestrade, who had been listening, with increasing bewilderment, finally spoke. This is all very tragic and complicated, Mr. Holmes, but the fact remains that theft is theft. I must take Miss Blackwood into custody. No, Lord Blackwood interjected with surprising vehemence. Inspector, I withdraw any charge of theft. These artifacts rightfully belong to Victoria's maternal lineage. He hesitated, glancing at his daughter's tear-streaked face. I acknowledge their claim. Chapter 12. The Heart Returns. Inspector Lestrade's professional composure momentarily faltered at Lord Blackwood's unexpected declaration. Sir, I'm not certain the law permits. The artifacts are Blackwood property, Lord Blackwood interrupted, firmly. If I choose to gift them to my daughter or acknowledge her right to them through her maternal lineage, that is my prerogative. There has been no theft if I retroactively grant permission. James stepped forward, his expression a complex mixture of shock and indignation. Father, you can't simply give away our family's prized possessions on a whim. These artifacts are part of the Blackwood legacy, a legacy built partly on deception, Lord Blackwood replied with surprising gentleness. Your sister has as much right to determine their fate as any of us. More, perhaps, given her blood connection to their origin. Victoria lowered the tablet. She still clutched, her hands trembling slightly. I never wanted to cause such pain, she said quietly. But when I discovered who I truly was, who my mother was, and learned that these sacred objects had been taken from her people, I couldn't remain silent. Dr. Tafari helped me understand their true significance. And where is this Dr. Tafari now? Holmes inquired, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Victoria hesitated before responding. In London, awaiting the artifacts. He is my mother's brother, my uncle. As I suspected, Holmes nodded. The man who briefly appeared here as Professor Morelli. Yes, Victoria admitted. When Father rejected his official request for the artifact's return, he devised a new approach. As Morelli, he gained access to document the collection while helping me understand my heritage and the artifact's importance. Lord Blackwood paled further. Makeda's brother? Here, in my home, and I didn't recognize him? He wore disguises, subtle alterations to his appearance, Victoria explained. And you met him only once, 30 years ago, when he was hardly more than a boy. Holmes turned to Inspector Lestrade. I believe this family matter can be resolved without criminal proceedings, Inspector. Lord Blackwood has acknowledged his daughter's claim to the artifacts. Lestrade appeared unconvinced. This is highly irregular, Mr. Holmes. There are proper channels for cultural repatriation, international agreements, which have failed repeatedly in this case, Holmes interrupted. Sometimes justice must transcend legal technicalities. Lord Blackwood is freely relinquishing his claim, and the artifacts are returning to direct descendants of their original guardians. After considerable discussion, and Lord Blackwood's insistence, Lestrade reluctantly agreed not to pursue charges, though he made it clear his official report would be carefully worded to avoid any suggestion of impropriety on his part. As dawn approached, the household gathered in the drawing room, the atmosphere heavy with revelations and unspoken emotions. Lady Eleanor had received the news of her husband's first marriage with remarkable composure, though her tight-lipped silence spoke volumes about the reckoning that would come later in private. Sir Edmund and Lady Fairfield had prudently announced their intention to return to London immediately, clearly eager to distance themselves from the family scandal. Dr. Patterson remained, providing a calming presence as the family confronted truths long buried. "There remains the matter of the already taken artifacts," Holmes observed, addressing Victoria. "The Obsidian Jewel and ceremonial dagger. Where are they now?" "Secure," she replied. "In the gardener's shed where Dr. Tafari and I established our operations. The incense, the ceremonial garments, everything we needed for the rituals necessary to handle the sacred objects." Holmes nodded. "I thought as much. The ash we found, residue from ritual purification incense, I presume?" "Yes. Each artifact must be properly consecrated before transportation. The rituals are ancient, passed down through my mother's family for generations." "And the secret passages?" I inquired. "How did you come to know them so intimately?" A ghost of a smile crossed Victoria's face. "I've lived in this house since infancy, Dr. Watson. As a curious child, I discovered most of them years ago. The passage to the collection room was my secret retreat, a place to read forbidden books and dream of distant lands. Little did I know those dreams were echoes of my true heritage." Lord Blackwood approached his daughter, hesitation in every step. "Victoria, I have wronged you in ways I can never fully make right. I told myself I was protecting you from a difficult truth, but in reality, I was protecting myself from facing my own actions." "Why did you leave her?" Victoria asked, the question that had clearly haunted her. "My mother, why did you leave her behind?" Lord Blackwood's shoulders sagged under the weight of decades of guilt. "Fear," he admitted. "Fear of scandal, of losing my position in society. When I returned to England, I convinced myself that our marriage wasn't binding under English law, that I could start anew. When I learned she was with child, with you, I arranged for your safe passage to England, but I couldn't. I couldn't face the consequences of acknowledging her publicly." "She never stopped loving you," Victoria said softly. "Her letters make that clear, even as her heart was breaking." James, who had been silently processing these revelations, finally spoke. "So my sister is half Ethiopian, a descendant of temple guardians." He shook his head in wonder. "All these years, and I never suspected." "Neither was meant to," Lord Blackwood replied. "The deception was thorough. Necessary, I believed, to ensure Victoria's acceptance in English society, at the cost of her true identity," Holmes observed quietly. The conversation continued as the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, illuminating the room's occupants in the gentle glow of a new day. Arrangements were made for the retrieval of the hidden artifacts and their proper documentation before leaving England. Lord Blackwood, in a gesture that seemed to surprise even himself, offered to accompany Victoria to Ethiopia to return the artifacts personally and to visit Makita's resting place. As Holmes and I prepared to depart Blackwood Manor later that morning, Victoria approached us privately. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "how did you know about the artifact's binding purpose? About the darkness in the mountain?" "I didn't," Holmes admitted, "but I observed your urgency, the specific pattern of selecting these 4 items rather than more valuable pieces, and the repeated references to the heart returning to the mountain in your translations. The rest was logical deduction, sacred, Objects typically serve protective functions in most religious traditions. She studied him with newfound appreciation. "And you believe me? About their importance?" Holmes considered his response carefully. "I believe that objects of profound cultural significance belong with those who understand and revere them. Whether they possess mystical properties is beyond the scope of my scientific methods, but I respect that such beliefs have power of their own." Victoria nodded, satisfied with his answer. "Thank you for allowing me to complete this sacred duty. My mother's spirit can finally rest, knowing the guardians have been reunited." As our train pulled away from the station, carrying us back to London, I reflected on the extraordinary events at Blackwood Manor. Holmes sat opposite me, his expression contemplative as he gazed at the passing countryside. "A most unusual case, Watson," he remarked, breaking our companionable silence. "Not merely a theft, but a reclamation. Not simply a crime, but a quest for identity and justice." "Do you truly believe those artifacts have mystical powers?" I inquired, curious about my friend's perspective on Victoria's claims. Holmes tamped tobacco into his pipe before responding. "Science has yet to explain all the mysteries of this world, Watson. The human mind, history, belief, these forces shape reality in ways we are only beginning to understand. I have encountered too many extraordinary things in my career to dismiss such possibilities entirely." He lit his pipe, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Besides, there was something in Victoria's eyes when she spoke of the mountain's darkness, a conviction born not of deception, but of inherited knowledge. Some truths are passed through blood and bone, not merely through evidence and observation. "Perhaps," I suggested, "this is one mystery that science alone cannot solve." "Perhaps indeed," Holmes agreed, sending a thoughtful plume of smoke toward the ceiling. "Though I confess I am more intrigued by Dr. Tafari's remarkable disguise as Professor Morelli, a brilliant piece of deception, one worthy of my own occasional forays into the art of disguise." I smiled, recognizing my friend's return to more comfortable analytical ground. Yet as the English countryside rolled past our window, I found myself wondering about distant mountains and ancient temples, about sacred duties passed through generations, and about the enigmatic Obsidian Jewel, the heart that was finally returning to its mountain.